So first, let's just get the lay of the land with power supplies. There's so many different kinds out there. We're going to start with the traditional, the one that everybody knows, the one that everybody loves, the classic Voodoo Lab pedal power. Now this is a 4x4. If you're not familiar with this one, I can bring it up on the screen here for you. This is the 4x4 classic one everybody knows and loves. We probably all have you had a pedal power in the past, Tim? Certainly never had one.
I've used them though.
You've used them. Do you like backline a power supply?
Oh, well, my roommate has one, so I've sort of used it for like a show.
Okay, got it. Mahia, pedal power, have you ever had one?
Never had one.
Well, if you're older than 30 like me, this was your only option for many years, was having a pedal power too. And this is what's called a linear analog supply. So these are 100% analog. They use toroidal transformers in order to provide the isolated power that we all know and love, and you always see that. Toroid is just a transformer that's in there, and the toroid is kind of just like the shape of the transformer, the type of transformer that it is, that allows each one of these outputs to be isolated, has regulators that go through each one of these. This is what the majority of us know as an isolated power supply, kind of the original isolated power supply. Now, on these guys, they were great. They were cutting edge for many years. But something that was in the pro audio side for years and years that is just kind of starting to make its way into the power supply world of guitar pedals is what's called a switching supply. And switching supply would be examples like this Chalk's DC7, which is a great supply. Also the Strymon Zuma, aka Zumba, for those of you who are dance inclined. And then there's also one other one. Tim, can you grab me that one that's hooked in? We might just have to be gentle with it, or just unplug it for a second from the... There we go. And we also have the CS12, which we're going to use to power some pedals today, which is by True Tone. So what these all have in common is that they are switching power supplies. Now, what that means is that it's using a different technique to get the isolation. And this technique is much more efficient than what the toroidal transformer would be, the analog supply version. Now, just because this is not analog and it's using high frequency, and it's using basically a high frequency oscillator going into these miniature little transformers that are way more efficient, take way less power, way smaller, and then kind of pushing that out to all of the individual outputs. So what that's doing is allowing you to have something that weighs way less, is in a way smaller form factor. Because if you compare, this is 1 inch versus something that's almost double the size of it in terms of the height in the pedal power. So it's doing it in a way smaller package. It's way lighter, way more efficient, and you can get a lot more power out of it. So like this can put out, I think it's 660 milliamps per, versus this one has a couple that can do 400, but even like weight-wise, I know you can't feel it over the internet, but it's a significantly heavier supply on this side, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's better. So most would agree that the switching power supplies are kind of the wave of the future. They're lighter, more efficient, put out more power, are typically can be quieter. The reason why I say that is when you have a transformer, even if it's a toroidal transformer, which is kind of the best at rejecting any sort of introducing any sort of noise into the signal, it kind of is the best at rejecting that. These guys are pretty impervious to even putting pedals right on top of the power supply. So a lot of times in the toroidal stuff, you can put stuff near it, but sometimes if you put digital things right on top of the toroid power supply, especially on stuff like this, where there's no there is some electrostatic shielding on this one because it's out of aluminum, but typically you're not going to get any electromagnetic shielding because this is aluminum. So the toroidal transformer, the magnetic field can get into stuff. It can cause there to be some weird issues if you put stuff right on top of it, depending on where the field is, and that can be a problem. But when you're into the switching supplies like this, you're not going to have that problem. You can put pedals right on top of it. It's not going to be an issue. So a lot of times if we use like a pedal power, and we use a pedal train, our pedals are sitting right on top of the pedal power. If we're using like kind of the old school like this can cause a problem if you're putting certain pedals on top of it, digital stuff that has clocks. Sometimes it can get into the signal path and make some weird noise. This won't be a problem when you're using the chocks. It won't be a problem if you're using the Zuma. It wouldn't be a problem if you're using the CS12. Those are all switching supplies, way less sensitive to that sort of stuff. Again, much higher power that they offer for the size that they are. And some of these are incredibly well built and incredibly robust. On my personal rig, I'm going to be using the DC7 because I really like these. The one thing that's a little different is they use RCA plugs, which is different than the standard kind of like 2.1 millimeter barrel, standard stuff that you would see on a Voodoo Lab or some of the other ones. They look this way on the pedal end, but on the supply end, they use RCA cables. But that's actually a better, more reliable connection than the 2.1 millimeter standard that most of the power supplies have used. Just has a better connection overall. But in any case, those are some key differences. What I would say is if you're trying to get entry level on a budget, you want to get a really inexpensive power supply that's a really great one. I think the obvious choice is the True Tone. This is the one that's kind of hanging out over here. This is obviously the big dog, has 12 outputs, but they make a smaller one called the CS6 and the CS7. Those are great for the money. Really, really effective, really, really quiet, totally switching, so it's got kind of the new wave of things as far as power supplies are concerned. It's not the old analog toroidal style transformer. This is new style power supply, really quiet, really efficient, pretty lightweight, pretty robust. It's built in a very similar form factor to the Pedal Power 2. It's a little bit bigger, but it does offer much more options in terms of the amount of outputs. So this is a consideration. Again, there's a smaller one that's maybe about a third of this size called the CS7, and then there's also the CS6, which is like a really short, thin profile like the DC7. Those are all really good options. Tim, if you would please. And then, of course, the chocks also, great value, really, really high quality power supply, also in that kind of same range, like kind of the low to mid $100 range. And then if you really wanted to splurge and go all out, you could go with something like the Strymon Zuma. I think these are about $250. These all have 500 milliamp outputs for every single output. And then it has two that on the end here, which you can go between 18 and 12 volts, in addition to 9 volts, so you can have some voltage variations in there as well. Now, one thing that I will say that is important to know about, though, is that not every pedal obviously will work at this voltage. You can, of course, from Voodoo Labs, they sell really, really high quality adapters. So you can get the current doubler, which is something that you can use if you, say, don't have enough juice to make up the amount of current needed. So if you had something like a Line 6 HX Stomp or something like that, you could use those, double the current. So out of the Strymon, say, you get 2 of those 500 milliamp outputs. You would get, put those together with the current doubler, and then it would get you to 1 amp, which would be enough to power something like those Line 6 ones. Or if you have something that's, say, like a Memory Man that takes 24 volts, you could set those 2 variable voltage ones on the Zuma here at the end. You could set these guys both to 12 volts, and then you would go and use one of the voltage doublers like this from Voodoo Lab, and that would get you to the full 24 volts. Equally, it could give you 18 volts if you didn't have enough 18 volt outputs on your power supply in order to get there. Voodoo Lab makes these, True Tone makes these. True Tone and Voodoo Lab also make a series of adapters for reverse polarity and stuff like that. So things like this that you would hook onto your ordinary 2.1 millimeter connectors. They also make ones that are going from a 2.1 to a 2.5 millimeter like this, and I don't actually know if this is the one that does that or if this is the reverse polarity. Each company has their own colors, but they're usually pretty labeled or pretty well labeled, so you can know which one goes to what kind of corresponding pedal, if that's going for reverse polarity, if that's going for a 2.1 to a 2.5 millimeter, like the Eventide stuff might be like an H9 is a 2.5 millimeter barrel on the input there. So lots of different options there. Another thing that we've been asked about a lot lately, let me take a drink because I feel like I'm running out of steam, is we got our battery power supply. Tim, you mind grabbing that one for me? Battery power supply. Now, we don't make this anymore, but a lot of people have been asking about this as a power supply alternative. And basically what this is, and I'll show you a little picture of it while I'm opening it up, is inside it just has 4 dedicated 9-volt batteries. And there's also, next to the LED, a power supply input. And what that power supply input does is it basically feeds into this, lets the pedals or the batteries know that the pedal board is turned on. So it will feed the batteries to the pedals when the pedal board is on. And when you unplug it, it just shuts everything off. So you don't have any need to unplug pedals like you normally would, so they wouldn't drain a battery. So it's kind of a cool way of being able to integrate batteries into your system and get all the isolation, because this is truly the quietest that you can get when you're using pedals on batteries. But of course, not all pedals will accept batteries. So that's one thing just to be aware of when you're going and you're having certain pedals run off a battery. The only things I really recommend using this guy on is overdrives, distortions, fuzz, wah. Other pedals won't benefit from using batteries on them, but there can be a different sound, especially if you're using carbon batteries. So yeah, this is a good solution if you want to have kind of the tone of a carbon battery, kind of on vintage fuzzes, vintage wahs, ODs, stuff like that. We're not using it today because we were trying to go to a dollar store that was nearby, and I guess it was closed because that's one of the easiest places to get 9-volt carbon batteries. Oh, you know what? It's coming through. It's coming through the headphones. So anyway, very cool solution that you can get if you want to kind of have that tone. And we actually did a demo with Tim. Would you say that was about a year ago, maybe, or a little over a year ago? Mm-hmm. We did a demo where we went side by side through a lot of common pedals like tube screamers, Vox wahs, fuzz faces, things like that, so you could hear what the difference was between powering it off of a battery versus powering off of supply. And again, not all pedals are going to be sensitive to carbon batteries, but older vintage style drives, wahs, fuzzes, those are all going to be pretty sensitive to that type of sound. So just a heads up on this. You can definitely check that out on our YouTube channel. I think the video is called something like what's the best isolated power supply, and we talk about other power supplies, and that's just kind of one of the things that we go over.